know if that would count. Maybe as I'm thinking about writing, I'm thinking, would that have been too long for an agent? So many years ago, I was pitching to agents. But anyway, that's the one I'll give you today.
We'll call it a long elevator ride, right? You're going to the top story. Yeah. But no, thank you for that. And now we sort of all have a general idea of what the book's about, because it did just come out, and so we haven't all had a chance to read it yet. So a little teaser for the people. So with that elevator pitch, that long ride, elevator pitch in mind, what would you say was the inspiration for that story, right? So you give us the inciting incident, but what sparked it for you personally as the writer?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's lots of inspirations for it. I mean, there's some things. I had a friend when I was young who had an accident. He didn't fall into a coma, but, some of that. But I would say the big one for me was just getting to writing something that I loved, right? So, in writing, we have like write what you know sort of advice, right? And when I approached this book, which I know we're going to talk about, like how many books have I written, which this was not my first one. I really approached it from like I wanted to tackle some subjects that I love. So I hit comic books and I hit baseball, and I kind of said, okay, well, what could I write about in that genre? This was my first. I knew I was writing middle grade because there were some stories that I did that I got some compliments on the voice and that kind of thing. So I said, okay, I'm going to try middle grade because I had tried other genres.
Okay.
And when I decided to do that, I just really wanted to write something that was like a write what you love thing. So I would say that's a real underlying inspiration for the whole thing. I mean, there's lots of things I could say to that, but let's go with that one.
Sure. So how much of you is Dan and how much of Dan is you, your main character?
That's interesting. I guess writers usually say, the same answer to that, which is that, there's a little bit of me in all the characters, right? So Dan is a lot, I guess. I would say a lot because he's a shortstop. I played shortstop when I was in Little League. Eventually he does some pitching, which I don't want to spoil anything, but and there's a piece, actually, I'm not going to say what I was about to say because that would be a spoiler, but there's a piece where he pitches kind of like the way I pitch. And so, I would say a lot. And then emotionally, he loves comics and baseball. So
yeah,
quite a bit, I would say. But then again, he's still Dan, he's still a character and not me. So I don't want to make that impression that I was just writing a book about myself, but quite a bit of him in me. I think it's important to write about things that you're connected to. Like, for example, my next book, which I know we're going to talk about later, is about a kid who loves cooking, right? And I don't really cook at all, but I adore all those chef shows, right? So there's a piece of me that I can write sort of like, I think this is an important word for writing, like authentically. Like, can you write the character you're writing? Can you write them authentically? And I think that has to do a lot with like, there's all this whole debate about can you write characters that are different genders or different races and things. I think that's the main word you got to sort of pull out is, can I do this authentically? And if you can, then sure. But if you can't, then you might be going in the wrong direction. I know here I go with the long-winded answers, but
it's fine. That's what we're here for, man. We're here to hear it. But no, to your point of write what you know, the other contrary and perhaps just as useful piece of advice is know what you write. Like you said, writing in different genders or races of those voices, it may be more difficult to ask because it's not naturally right yourself. But if you do the research, if you know those people, if you thoroughly try to walk in their shoes, that voice could come out authentic, right? And it
exactly.
could. Yeah. And I think as long as it's done respectfully and authentically, then absolutely, right? And so know what you write, but also write what you know. So a little bit of chiasmus there, a little bit of both. So you had mentioned before that this was just a second ago that this is your first time writing middle grade level, right? So you had done something else previously. So what you said, somebody recommended that you try it and that you did it, and obviously you did it well because hell, man, you got picked up at HarperCollins on your first book. And that's phenomenal, right? In this genre, right? And so that's amazing, right? A, you got published. B, you got published by one of the big four, right? That's great. Just everybody should know that. You're like, yay, one of our own, once again. But so you had obviously had written other stuff before. So what genres were those in, right? What kind of topics were those sort of approaching?
Right. Yeah. So I definitely don't want to give the impression that I just, wrote one book and it was my first middle grade book, as I said, and as you said, but I think it was my 5th completed manuscript. So I had quite a long journey, many years. And the genre that was in, I guess you would call it, maybe that was part of the problem. I'm not sure what genre it was, but I think I wrote a couple books that you would probably call sort of like urban fantasy when I first started. Those were really practice books. I would say they weren't very good at all. My 3rd book, I wrote what I would call more of a, they say in the industry, an upmarket, like a book club type book for adults.
Okay.
And that one I did get an agent with. So I guess that was better anyway. And then, we tried to sell that book with that agent and it just didn't find a publisher.
Sure.
And then I wrote another one of those kinds of books, sort of I call it a book club, upmarket, again for adults. And then finally the 5th book was this one, right? So I think I started in 2016. It got bought in late 2018. And of course now it's published in 2020. So just that book went on a 4-year journey. So if I didn't want to say how many years my whole journey has been, but yeah, that book, from start to now is over 4 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought in that comment you just said, I thought it was interesting that you talked about, you had deliberately tried to write within a genre, right? So like this is the mindset to work in, produce work, right? Would you recommend that for other writers? Would you say like, keep that in mind as like a starting point, like sort of a lane or whatever you want to call it to work within, a paradigm within which to work? Or would you say that write the story and you'll sort of find the genre or the niche for it afterwards? It's sort of like a chicken or egg thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, because, since I've gotten published, I've gotten associated with some other middle grade writers who have debuted this year. There's groups on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And it struck me how several of them started as YA and then they wrote the book and it was just trending younger and they ended up realizing, or someone told them even in the industry, this is, you're like their agent or somebody said, you're submitting this to me and telling me it's YA, but this is actually middle grade. You just need to age down your character and do this. So I've heard that story, but the way I would answer the question from my perspective is that, I mean, I think it's good to know what you're writing for, at least for me it was. So for, I think you can get there either way, right? I just described ways where people got, I don't think you could write like, I'm writing a mystery thriller for adults and halfway through I realized it was middle grade, right? Because I don't think that big of a shift happens, right? But maybe it could be, but for me, I think middle grade and probably YA too, and a lot of different genres have a certain voice especially. And so I think it would be hard to not know you were writing for middle grade and then end up there. I think only from like YA could you sort of, maybe not only, but most likely, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered the question, but.
Don't worry, I'm gonna needle you some more. That's what I'm here for.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, that's the perfect transition to my next question, right? So I am most familiar with YA. On the side for years, I've read and reviewed YA stuff and over time, you just kind of get an idea of the voice and the characters, and sometimes you see some of those narratives repeating, right? And it's like, oh, how do I make this unique? But I'm not as familiar with middle grades, right? So I'm, as somebody who's written and gotten this published, tell me and all of our listeners here tonight, what's the difference about writing for middle grade? Is it a distinction in the language? Is it the complexity of the story? Is it something else entirely? Let us know.
Right. I think, what I said before is probably my main answer to that, which is the voice. I think voice is a huge thing with middle grade in terms of, you have to find, for me, I felt like what I realized was I was very connected to the me from that, period of time, that age group. I'm not as connected to myself in high school, let's say, so I don't want to write stories about high school. I just was glad to get through it, so, but middle grade, my friends and everything from that period of time, I'm just more connected to it as a person. So I think I feel like I have the voice. Now, when I say that about voice, I don't mean that I try to write the way, we spoke when we were that age, because that's out of date, right? And at the same time, I don't try to be cool, right? I don't try to like listen in to how 13-year-olds talk today or 12-year-olds and then try to mimic their speech. But what I do is just kind of try to keep it. I actually have some examples that I think will wait, and I'll read a little bit later. But
yeah.
I have some examples of this that maybe will give people a better idea of what I'm talking about. If you don't read middle grade, there's like definitely a voice that you're going for that's kind of a little bit sarcastic, a little bit humorous, like right throughout the whole thing. It's just a way of, kids they like funny stuff, they like scary stuff. So if you're writing in that genre, you got to sort of keep in mind the kinds of things they like and kind of go for that. So I'll read some examples in a bit, but let's not slow it down with that quite yet.
You're good. No, as Chris said, a teaser for later on in this conversation. He's going to give us a nice little treat of an excerpt that he's going to read for us. But so beyond, I guess, connecting with your past self, right? So I don't know how old you are. I'm going to guess it was like 40-ish years ago when you were 12. How other than your memories, how else did you connect with somebody in that age range to get into that mindset, right? To speak that authentic voice, as you mentioned.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, a lot of it is emotion, right? So I think again, for me, I'm just kind of connected to that. So I don't know that I did like some sort of exercise that puts me in that mindset, but I think I had some memories. Like I said, I was writing about something that was similar to something that happened to one of my friends. And I think, and maybe this is true, it's not really necessarily just true of middle grade, but I think when you're writing about something, right, you want to connect to some emotion or feeling that you had. So like, for example, if you're some reviews and so forth describe my book as sort of dealing with grief and how do you deal with grief. So it could be that when I'm writing Dan dealing with grief, I was thinking about maybe not even something that happened when I was 13, but some other moment when I was dealing with grief in my life. I mean, I will say, during the period of time I was writing this, my sister was fighting cancer from like, say, 2016 to 2018, which ironically is the period of time from when I started writing to, when the book sold. And I was probably channeling some of that, right? So Dan wasn't dealing with somebody who was suffering from cancer. It was a totally different thing, but he was dealing with somebody close to him who he was really wanting to just be back to the way they were. And here I am writing, dealing with that sort of in my life too. So I think that's probably a key point is, is there something parallel, even if it's not the same event, totally different subject, but is that emotional core, are you digging into that? And that's not just middle grade, that could be anything, right? Why, whatever. Yeah.
So one of our questions from the audience, from Brian, is asking, and applies to this, can adults still enjoy and connect with your new novel with this in mind?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. Yeah. So age is 8 to 80, right? So yeah, the age range is 8 to 12. But I really think, it's a complex storyline. I know that was one of the other things that we kind of talked about a little bit or previewed. It's a complex storyline, and some of the reviews are, have been like, oh, I was really liked how all the different storylines came together at the end. So it's not simple. Maybe some people think it's, that, I can read this kind of book. I need something that's for adults, that's meaty, but I do think it's meaty. It's just a different voice, right? So it's just like a younger person. So it's kind of like asking for me, and this is just my opinion because I'm a middle grade writer and I do read a ton of it and enjoy it. I mean, if you enjoy like one of my favorite movies is Super 8, right? Okay. So, as an adult, if you enjoy that kind of movie, it's a bunch of kids teaming up and solving a problem or whatever, or E.T. or that kind of thing, then you probably enjoy middle grade books too, at least of a certain kind, because it's just a different age character, but the adventures are still there and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Hearing you say that makes me think of Stranger Things, right? And you get the two middle schoolers, another Atlanta local piece right here, but and that show's phenomenal, and it's middle grade kids, into high school as the show goes on, but you can connect with every one of those characters, and that's just phenomenal writing, right?
Exactly. And actually there was a point where this book has been, I won't say it compares to Stranger Things, but it's been pitched that way in a couple of different places. So yeah, cool. So that kind of, I like bands of kids. I like groups of kids who are diverse, kind of going through some sort of adventure. This one's a little bit maybe it's not as much of an adventure, but it's still an adventure.
Yeah.
It's not Rick, I don't say his last name right, but Rick Riordan. It's not that kind of middle grade, which is very action oriented and adventurous, but there's all kinds of middle grade. Yeah.
So for those who didn't catch it the first time, if you like Stranger Things, you'll like Dan Unmasked. Go buy the book. Plug.
Thank you very much.
But wait, there's more. So you had mentioned before comic books, right? You had mentioned that as integral to your personal life and development, and it becomes a big part of your book here as well. And so, from what I saw, the Captain Nexus is the name of the comic book, right? So tell me more about him, about that character and the comic book, and what the power is. Is he a superhero that we are familiar with? And what was it like writing a book inside of a book? I always think that's interesting, the meta question of that, or the meta development of that.
Sure. So, the comic book, of course, I had to create the comic book because that's one of the things that ties the kids together in the beginning when I first started the book. I didn't know exactly what the comic book meant yet. Of course, you go through all this revision and stuff, but I knew that they all loved this comic book. And I knew the book was kind of about family quite a bit. So it's kind of very obvious. It's Captain Nexus and the Nexus 5, right? And the members of the team, Captain Nexus is kind of this scientist, and his wife is on the team, and his son. And it's very much like Fantastic Four, except the Nexus 5, right? So to answer your question about what's it based on, it's the Fantastic Four.
Okay.
What the comic ended up being from a writing perspective is it's a big metaphor to what's happening in the real life story. So when Nate falls into his coma, and this is not really a spoiler, but when Nate falls into his coma, the baseball team is without their best pitcher, and they're kind of limping along in this tournament. And in a similar way, then they still gather up to read this comic because they just have to, and they're looking for inspiration from it. And in the comic, Captain Nexus is the leader of that team, and he gets stuck in the Nexus zone, which is kind of where he got his powers. And they find out that when he is not connected to them anymore, they start to lose their powers. And so that's very much how the Little League team feels, is that they're losing their abilities to do things. So it's a back and forth. And as far as your question about how much, how did I enjoy it? I mean, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Once I figured out why the comic book was there and it actually had a purpose in the story besides just this thing they liked, then it was really fun to weave those things together and make one book inform the other and vice versa. So the things that were happening in the comic were then informing what happened in the real life story. I say the real life story, the other part of the book, and vice versa. So yeah, that was neat. And the powers are really the powers. There's a reason for the powers that each of the heroes have in the book, but I'm not going to get into them too much because it's a little bit of a spoiler to what happens. Okay. But basically, Captain Nexus, he just has this ability to wield like the Nexus energy that he got from the Nexus zone, which is sort of like the cosmic rays and Fantastic Four sort of thing. So it's not really, that part isn't too important, but that's the answer to your question.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So beyond the Captain Nexus concept, right? Have you written comic books as well? As some of you are like, whether that's like as an exercise or like I've actually written this and try to get this published kind of thing. And so you're drawing off of that. And if so, can we expect a Captain Nexus spin-off somewhere in the future? Right. Is that book 2? Is that?
Yeah, this is the moment where I say, if Marvel and DC are listening, I'm totally open. I have not written comic books, even as like sort of an exercise. Okay. The comic books in the book are written sort of as prose. Now, my agent, who is actually has an artistic background, she really, when she was pushing the book, she really wanted to find somebody who was going to take those sections, because there's basically like three issues in the book. So when the book starts, they're reading number 14, and the series goes to number 16. So we cover kind of number 14, 15, and 16. And each of those books are covered in the book because the kids get together in the basement and they read them, and I do describe them. And I did have one review that basically said, I didn't think that I could picture a comic book without seeing it visually, but the way it's described in here, they could see the comic book. So that was good. That was a compliment. But I've never, I've looked at scripts and actually I recently took a course from Benjamin Percy, who's a published author. He wrote books like Red Moon and so forth, and kind of fantasy horror type books. But now he also writes a whole bunch of comic books, and he gave a course not too long ago about what he learned writing comics that he now applies back to his novels. And so it's just this very visual kind of, it was a neat course, especially for me, because I'm so into comics. But I would love to write Captain Nexus as a comic. I guess I would, what happens next, you know, after this book ends and they're still a team. That's not a spoiler. So, but yeah, I don't have any plans. It's not what book 2 is. We'll talk about book 2 in a little bit. I already mentioned it's sort of that chef thing. Yeah.
So I think that's a good point. The example you gave is step out of your comfort zone, right? And try flex your muscles a different way and see how that brings you back to your main thing, or discover the brand new thing and how you might be good at that. You know, that applies to the comic book elements coming into your prose, right? As well as the, you know, oh, I'm trying to write this sort of genre, and then I go to middle school, I'm like, oh, this works, you know, and then you run with that. So I think that's a takeaway nugget for our listeners. Like, hey, try something different that could be amazing, right? Like do something you haven't done before. Stop beating your head against the same wall in the same way. So speaking of the superheroes, right, superpowers, you have a companion guide to this book, right? So that is for the teachers to use, right, as they teach it for middle school students. So it's already primed for teachers to use in the classroom, whether that is in that physical classroom or in COVID days and in the digital classroom, right? So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I partnered with a firm called Blue Slip Media for some of my like publicity and so forth. And one of the things they offer, and it's pretty common in the middle grade genre, especially to create these supplemental teaching materials. And in my case, specifically, we created this curriculum guide, which has a bunch of questions on it that, you know, it's basically like, if you're writing for adults, you would have like a book club guide, right? And then you would put that out there, and then people who read the book can go download that from your site, and they can get questions that are more penetrating and make you see things that you didn't see necessarily in the book. And so, of course, with kids, when people, you know, say when teachers buy a class set or media specialists at a school buy books for the library, you know, having something like that for them to supplement, you know, and have activities and so forth, it's a pretty obvious sort of thing you do once you get into the middle grade. I mean, those of you who haven't looked into middle grade may say, oh, I never heard of that. But if you were into middle grade, it would be, you know, one of the things your agent would advise you on pretty quickly and that kind of stuff. And the other thing I'll just say about it is my sister is a 5th grade teacher, and that's kind of right in the zone of the target range down in Florida. And she helped me a little bit with that, actually. So it was developed by this other company, but when I got the first version to review, I was like, I don't know what I'm looking at. And so I sent it to my sister, and that was nice because we had a back and forth, and she was able to tell me, you know, when I teach this kind of thing, I would shift this around or this. So that was a secret weapon, another secret weapon, I guess I had developing this curriculum guide was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So fun fact, I was going to be an English teacher. So I'm certified to do so. And so I'm like, ooh, curriculum guide, right? I immediately popped up like, this is cool. And I dug into it, and I was like, this is like well done, both in design and the questions, the content. It's amazingly useful for a teacher, like you said, Chris. And having your sister who is in the practice, like sort of like check mark it all as you go through it is great. And so I read through the whole thing, and one of the questions in there, like you said, very like poignant, thought-provoking questions, is where do people go in a coma? Right, and that is one of the questions, because one of our main characters, you know, goes into a coma, as you revealed, and it happens fairly early on. Not really a spoiler.
Right.
So, I mean, what's your question? What's your answer to that question? Or is that like I read the book?
No, it's not necessarily read the book. I mean, I don't know if I have an answer to that, right? But I think the question itself was a good one. It was what the character was asking, because I mentioned the whole thing about the metaphor, right? So and I also mentioned that there's a little bit of magical thinking. So one of the reasons I got to that in the book as a writer sort of was because I knew that I knew that Dan was feeling guilty, and I knew that I wanted him to go on this journey to try to find a way to wake Nate up. And in the process, he's kind of diving into art and creativity, and there's a lot of things that happen. But I needed sort of him to ask himself that question, because that got him to think about the parallel to what Captain Nexus was going through and how he was stuck in the Nexus zone. And so, again, this is not too big of a spoiler. Dan kind of gets the idea that maybe Nate is in the Nexus zone and I need to do something to bring him out of it, just like his team in the comic book is trying to bring him out of it. So yeah, I don't know if I have an answer to where people go. I know that in the book, I have a study that's a real life study called FAST, F-A-S-T, which is familiar, auditory, sensory, and I'm forgetting the T. It's not training, I think. Yeah, but anyway, what that is they've done this study at Northwestern, and the kids stumbled upon it as I stumbled upon it in my research. And what it is when you have a person in a coma, they found that when you tell them stories or kind of give them their memories, like long-term memories, like you bring in videos and you play for them, you know, like old family videos and things like that, that they tend to recover faster. There's some study about that. So that would indicate, you know, if I had to guess, I'm not a doctor, so I shouldn't be answering this question about where do people go, but it would indicate that that they're there and they're listening. And I think that's part of Dan's theory as well, because what he and his friends try to do is make a fan fiction of their comic book that they intend to read to him. And they feel like telling him this story that he loves so much is going to bring him back. And yeah, it doesn't exactly happen all that way, but there's, anyway, as you read the book, you'll see what does happen, which I don't want to spoil. So
and Chris just gave us a perfect example of write what you know, but know what you write, right? He said, I'm not a doctor, I'm not familiar with this, but hey, I found this study, I did my research, and now I can write about it, you know, authentically and with confidence. And that's a perfect example of that. I want to dig into your past a little bit here. So I learned in my internet searching, because I'm a thorough person, that you started your storytelling days early on, right? With a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons. So a little bit of our tabletop fans, D&D guy here. Tell me how that has worked its way into your writing today.
Yeah, so we played Dungeons and Dragons when I was younger. I wasn't the dungeon master. I had a friend whose older brother was usually the dungeon master. And to me, in Dungeons and Dragons, that's like the primary storyteller. And then the rest of us are characters, right? And we make characters. So first of all, obviously creating characters, right? Because you roll and you make your characters and you decide what type of person they are. And that's just early writing, right? Because that's what you're doing when you're making a story, you're making characters and that kind of stuff. But I think what I was really inspired by was just, you know, he created I felt like, to my whatever age year I was when we were doing this, I can't remember, I felt like it was such a rich story, right? That and the story I've told in some interviews that you probably ran across was that I told my friend, I remember we had a Dungeons and Dragons session, then we would go and play basketball in the driveway, and I was telling him, you know, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to take this adventure that we're going, because I just thought this adventure was so great, and I'm going to write this into a book. And of course, at that age, I was a real big fantasy reader too. So I'm doing this Dungeons and Dragons fantasy, and then I'm reading, of course, The Lord of the Rings, but, you know, even others, you know, like Dragonlance, which is a Dungeons and Dragons book. You know, David Eddings had a 5-book series that, you know, there's all kinds of like Raymond E. Feist. There's all these, if people are as old as me and they were reading fantasy at the time I was, they would know who these people are. Yeah, so I was just a big fantasy fan. And I guess the Dungeons and Dragons is mainly the character things, and also just the depth of the storyline that my friend was just inventing for us all, that I just got really inspired by. And I don't think I understood. I think one of the things I learned when I started writing, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago, was that I didn't really understand as many movies as I watched, and as much as that inspired me, and as much as I loved reading, I didn't really understand story yet. What made a good story? Like you were talking before about inciting incident and structure, and now I'm a very big like structure person. Now I annoy my wife when we watch a movie and I say, oh, that was the midpoint right there, and she's like, please, I just want to watch the movie. Yeah, but I'm very big into structure in that way now. So yeah, so I've learned a lot about what makes a story, which I didn't know when I said, oh, I think I'll start to write. You know, it's just Had to learn that for sure.
Yeah. That's super cool though to hear you talk about, childhood you saying I'm going to do this thing, and now adult you has done the thing, right? That's awesome. That's like yay on living out that childhood dream.
Yeah, thank you.
And another thing I wanted to point out, pardon me, is that in that curriculum guide, there's actually a really cool exercise. Chris has a build your own superhero workshop, right? And so that's sort of part of that exercise for the teachers to do, and Chris sort of hosts it as well. So it's almost, if you want to find the corollary to D&D, that's build your character sheet, right? Kind of an example of that right there. And so for little folks who are a little bit nerdier, kind of built in there, kind of encouraging the kids that way to storytelling at the very least, and developing great characters. And so to sort of tangent a little bit on nerdy things, you have a background in computer science, computer programming, which is perhaps unusual for a writer. Anybody can be a writer.
Right.
And that's one thing I've learned throughout my days of, if you can tell a good story, you can tell a good story. But I want to know the connections from you, the connections between writing a book and your computer knowledge, right? Is that a structure kind of thing once again, or is it something else entirely?
I think there's a little bit of structure. I think the types of programs I would do or have done have a lot of pieces and parts that make up a whole, right? And so that's kind of similar to a book, like tackling something. When you talk to people, we're all writers probably on this call, so we know, right, how it works. But like my sister-in-law just finished the book, and she had called us up and thought it was good and everything else. But she said something like, I just can't imagine having such a big thing in your head, right? That you had, like, she was kind of marveling at, which is didn't give me a big head or whatever, or maybe it did. But I think where that comes from is like if you work another job, or you are used to having a big thing that you have to keep organized, and a program is like that, I think. And then also, I think, just as far as my background goes, it, some of that was my dad's fault, right? Because he was definitely like, I always wanted to be a writer, as I just communicated, but he was like, if you're going to college and I'm paying for it, you're getting a skill that you could use. So, I was not going to go get an English degree. That was just, I would have liked to, right? But my dad was
English major here, not offended.
Yeah. He was not into it. No, that's not meant to be offensive. I would have loved it. Please. Yeah, but that was just, my dad's thing. And I enjoy, the two things I was strongest at in school, like I was terrible at science, to be honest, but I was really good at English and really good at math. So I don't know, that's a strange combination, I suppose, but that was it. So yeah.
Sure. And whatever your knowledge source is, use it, right? Put it to work. Write what you know what you write, once again, and that knowledge can come from anywhere. So incorporate it, right? So one last thing about your sort of your past, and then I'll talk a little bit more about, I'll sort of turn it to you to doing the excerpt. But in more of my digging about you, I've learned about, forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, but you're into Kyoto, which is Japanese archery, quote unquote, the way of the bow, right? And so this I find super interesting, because every writer has their thing, right? And like, how do they get in the zone, or how do they like get that story? How do they pull it out of themselves? So how does that practice work its way into your writing practice?
Yeah, so it's pronounced Kudo, which is just slightly different. But yeah, it's I saw you uncovered that when you sent me a little preview of what you were going to ask me, and it was super interesting. I was like, where did he get that? But I actually don't practice anymore. A few years ago, I developed Parkinson's, and it really kind of challenges, my ability to do the bow and everything else. But I will say this about doing it. Yeah, when I started practicing Kudo, around that time is when I started saying, finally, I'm gonna write, right? Like this dream I've had since I was 12 or 13. I'm gonna do it. So I think I definitely think that Kudo put me in a mindset when I was practicing it, that, you mentioned it's like emptying your mind, and it's very meditative. And I think it put me in a mindset to sort of go after certain things. So it was definitely very helpful. How do I employ it now? Obviously, I don't practice it anymore, but a lot of the things I learned, stick with me for that. And I guess I probably do, use it a little bit. The mind space that you get into in Kudo is kind of a mind space that I probably get into a little bit. in writing, you know, that zone, like you said. It's not really conscious, but I'd probably be lying if I said there isn't something that I'm getting into when I do that. So yeah.
Yeah, and in my rabbit hole I went on in YouTube last night, I found emptying the mind is sort of like a phrase that's common with this practice. And one of the Zen sayings, like I said, rabbit hole, one of the Zen sayings, and I'm gonna put this in the chat, is that it is not the target that the archer aims at, but in shooting the arrow, we'll find the self in the target. And I think that's super interesting for writing, right? As a writer in the story you told here.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna put that in the chat so all can have that wisdom. But you know, I think that's an interesting practice once again, and that comes in and sort of influences you, like, because you're not writing about yourself, but you're writing about a piece of yourself, a version of yourself. And so when you're if the target is the book, you're sort of not aiming at the target, but aiming to get through it with yourself, or to get to it, I guess, with yourself.
Right, and I think just even beyond the writing itself, the publication journey, right, the rejection and the, you know, one of the things you learn with Kudo is sort of like exactly that you, like in Kudo, you don't release the bow. So it's going to sound weird to people who do Western archery, but you kind of keep opening the bow, and it's hooked. I'll use my hand here but it's hooked on this little piece in your glove. And as you keep opening and opening it, eventually it just comes off on its own. And that's when the arrow fires. So it's very much like a trust thing, and very much like you just have to learn that, you know, it will come when it comes, right? So you can put all kinds of life lessons in that, but one of the things you can think about is the publication journey. And if you just keep practicing and you just, you know, eventually the good things will come when they come, you know, sort of thing. So yeah, there's definitely a mindset that was helpful that Kudo created. Yeah,
that's super cool. I mean, that resonated with me, right? Like, oh wow, like that's an interesting way to conceptualize that.
Yeah.
So on that note, that's a beautiful transition you gave me there, Chris. You know, it'll come when it comes. Let's talk about the timing of things, right? So your book came out, like I said, a couple weeks ago, mid-pandemic or early, and who knows? We don't know when this thing's ending, right? So how has that process been, right? You release this book, you're promoting it as best you can digitally, right? Because we're trying to respect each other's distance and not transmit this virus to anybody. How's that been? What's that process been like for you? Is it harder, easier, better, different?
Yeah, so obviously, like a lot of events like this one, my launch was also virtual with Foxtail. It's obviously more virtual than I intended. I've have lots of published writer friends, so obviously I've been to my share of live launch parties, and I can't say that I didn't envision for myself, right? Oh, you know, I'm actually quite a bit of an introvert, so I don't normally throw a party, right? So this was the one thing I was going to really throw a party for, and then I didn't get to do it. So that's, you know, I can get into that and say, oh, it was disappointing and all that, but I've actually enjoyed all these. You know, I'm sitting here at my house. When we're done with this, I don't have to drive back home or do anything. I just walk downstairs, and so I don't know. I mean, it's obviously there's a perspective there, right? And you know, if you have the right perspective, I mean, it's not the end of the world. It's fine. As far as marketing, I think I got a little, and I know you mentioned this in the list of things about this particular topic. I got a little bit of a boost because the book got picked by the Indies Introduced program for the American Booksellers Association, which basically means that there was a panel of booksellers, like the people at Foxtail. Foxtail wasn't on the panel, but in all different states. There was one in Missouri and one in Denver. And anyway, there's this panel of like about 10 maybe or so, and they all read all these books that are debuting, and they pick like the top 5 middle grade, and mine made the list, which was really great. And so what that did is it took the some of the pressure off, because I knew that it was getting visibility at these little bookstores all around the country, because if you get named to that list, you get sent in this newsletter, and you know, all kinds of good things happen. There was a presentation online, virtual again, because everything is virtual, but you know, so that was, and it also made it a lot of fun because it was like something was happening, right? So I think some people I've heard that are debuting during this time have been like, oh, it's just so silent. It was so anticlimactic. My book came out and nothing. And, you know, I was fortunate to have, I don't know how many people I had at the launch, but it was quite well attended, which I appreciate. All my friends and family coming on and doing that. So
As they
I feel
should.
good. Yeah. So yeah, so I don't know, meandering answer, but it's been bad, but not bad. So that's my answer.
Yeah, yeah. It is what it is. You're making it work, right?
That's
That
right.
is the dice you have rolled, and that's what you got to make it work. But it doesn't hurt though that you have gotten attention from the American Booksellers Association, the Junior Library Guild. You're one of the gold standard selections for that, and you got a bump from Becky Albertalli, which is best-selling author of Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda. Right? That's a recognizable title. And she says, and I'll put this quote in the chat. Dan Unmasked is a grand slam of a debut, timeless, moving, and filled to the brim with heart. I can't stop thinking about it. And you know, that's a hell of a cosign from somebody who's also successful in doing this, right? And she was at Broadleaf last year, right? So it's you know, coming back full circle. But that's a huge nod. And so with that, I kind of want to turn it back over to you with that and let you do a little excerpt for us, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
With that beautiful sell from Becky. Let's hear it. Let's hear from the man himself.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so I'll try not to take up too much time because I know we're running short on time. I do want to take any questions that there might be out there. And it's just a full disclosure on the Becky thing. She and I have been friends for a long time, so I'm sure her blurb was fully honest and everything else. But just, you know, also full disclosure, there's a bunch of writers in the Roswell area that we kind of get together and we're friends, or critique partners. They're all from Roswell and I'm not, so I don't know why they let me in, but anyway, they do, so I appreciate it. Yeah, so I just, you know, I have some very short, and let's see if I can get this Kindle to pop up. I did an event with a writer named J.L. Esplin over the weekend.
Okay.
And she has a book called 96 Miles, which is a middle grade book where it's kind of a dystopian. It's about these kids who the power goes out and they don't know why, and they have to walk 96 miles to the next house to, you know, so anyway, it's an adventure. I'm not really necessarily pitching her book, but I want to give credit because I want to read from it. What I wanted to read just a little bit was this voice thing that I'm talking about. So you can sort of hear it if you don't read middle grade. And sometimes it's as simple as like when you make a metaphor or a simile in a book, what do you choose? Like, do you choose something that kids identify with? So here they're sneaking around a truck and it says, the sound our souls make on the road is like the first few mouthfuls of Captain Crunch before the milk makes it soggy, or like fireworks exploding beneath our feet. And I realize there's no possible way to get across this gravel road quietly. So just the idea that if you're going to write about, you know, these kids sneaking around and you're going to write about the crunching gravel, like compare it to Captain Crunch, right? Because that's like a middle grade technique, I would say, right? So it's just like a voice thing. And then I think for my own book, I'm only going to read one more. I actually had 4 or 5 things here, but I'm just going to read because we're running out of time. So this is from the beginning of Dan Unmasked. I'll just go to the beginning. And again, it's kind of like, how do kids think about their parents and their family and this kind of thing? So Dan is doing something on the baseball field right now. So it says, I know mom must be wincing in the stands. She's been begging me to stop wiping snot on my sleeve since I was 5. But today, 8 years later, my nose is dry. I only did that to let Nate know I got his message, loud and clear. And then there's another little paragraph where he said that, you know, says something else, but then he says, nose on sleeve it is. Mom can roll her eyes all she wants, right? So it's just that voice, like getting into, you were asking before about mindset, getting into like a kid's head a little bit. Like, you know, he's like, I see mom rolling her eyes, but she could do that all she wants. I'm trying to send a secret message to my friend Nate, and you know, that's from the very, like, that was like the second page. And what I'm establishing there a little bit is how close Nate and Dan are. They actually feel like they have this telepathy, which is kind of a comic book thing. It's how I keep mixing the baseball and the comic book in the early part of this book, just to get that kind of, like, I'm establishing the characters, right? I'm establishing who they are, how close they are. And then kind of like even mom, you know, she can't break into this connection we have, right? So it's just a technique. if you don't read or write middle grade, I thought I would just like read a couple things. I had a couple more, but like I said, we're close on time, and I don't know if anybody has any questions, but if they do,
So, I mean, to Chris's point, folks, we are getting your time. So if you have any questions, now is the time to ask them. I can probably pick one, maybe two more to throw to Chris to answer. So to give you guys another second to type those up. Chris, tell us about your second book, right? You're finalizing that now. Is this happening in the same world as Dan Unmasked? Is it a new novel story world entirely? Where are we at with this?
Yeah, so it's called The Last Super Chef, and it's out next July 6th. I have the date, so unless the pandemic does something, that's the one thing about the pandemic. You were asking me earlier, it's like you kind of hold your breath, like nothing changes, and that. But we do have a date, it's July 6th, and The Last Super Chef. So there's this program. The easiest way, this is the quick elevator pitch that I didn't do before. It's Willy Wonka meets Gordon Ramsay. So it's a contest. It's a kid. Yeah, it's like wait, a little bit more. It's a kid who's he's 11, whereas Dan was 13, and he's this super good like chef. You see like Master Chef Junior, these kids on TV, and they're like, how do they know how to make a souffle when they're 11, right? But somehow they do. He's that kind of kid. And he also has a secret, because the super chef, who is like the Gordon Ramsay, who has the most famous show on TV, is, at least he believes, we'll find out in the book if it's true or not, but is his long absent father. So kind of like he doesn't live with them. The mom doesn't really talk about him. And so he wants to go and get on this contest. It's sort of a Willy Wonka-ish contest. There's 5 kids who come, and they're going to be named the very last super chef, and then the show is going to end, and nobody knows why he's ending the show, kind of like the mystery of why was Willy Wonka giving his factory away? Like, what was the deal? So there's, I was very inspired by all that, and it's kind of a modern take on that kind of story, but middle grade still.
Yeah. So sticking in that genre, as one of our audience members curious, do you have any kids? Do you have kids, or do you write for kids in your life, nephews, nieces, whatever?
Right. Yeah, I don't have kids, which people are always like, wait, you're right, and you don't, you write for kids, you don't have kids. I do have a lot of nieces and nephews that I'm really connected to. So I have one niece in particular, for example, who used to come and visit us every summer, and it was during like the height of the Harry Potter days, and she was really into Harry Potter, so we used to take her to like those midnight, like when the book would come out at like midnight at a bookstore and you had to wait in line and all that. So, I'm really connected to my nieces and nephews and telling stories to them, and these kind of stories for this age, like Harry Potter. So I guess that's who I write for more than anything. In fact, several of the characters in Dan Unmasked kind of have the same first names as some of my nieces and nephews. It's a little Easter egg in there. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's in my opinion, a great way to end it. Writing for the kids, so they'll enjoy it, they'll love it, and some of them even get a name shout out in there. And so with that, I think that's all the time we have, and I want to turn it back over to Zach to sort of close us out. Chris, thank you for the time and the wisdom, and for sharing your stories with us. We appreciate it. And Zach, I'm gonna kick it back over to you to take it away.
Yeah, just thank you for the great questions, Justin.
You guys were awesome. That was an incredible interview, and I think I would pay to just listen to you guys talk for a while. So, Justin, thank you very much for moderating this conversation. Chris, thank you for joining us, and much success to you with Dan Unmasked and everything in the future, because we've known each other tangentially for about 4 years, and I'm very happy to see you experiencing the success that you're having so far, and certainly can't wait to dig into Dan. But
thank you.
Well, that is all we have tonight. Thank you all for coming out. And again, I would like to remind you that we do have a couple more programs coming up next week that you can join us for. And we do have the conference coming up in October. You can register now and sign up for your one-on-ones. And as we continue to evolve our plans, we will we'll certainly let everybody know more. But that's all we have for tonight. So I hope you all stay safe. Thank you for joining us, and see you sometime soon.